On this week's Carrier App, we speak with Dan Hayes from PwC's Strategy and Division to discuss how next-generation mobile networks will enable IoT and smart city applications. All right, well, thanks for joining us on this week's Carrier App. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News. And this week we are pleased again to be joined by Dan Hayes, who's the principal at PwC Strategy and Division, to talk a bit about what's happening in the IoT and carrier space. So, hey, Dan, thanks for joining us again. We always appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks so much. So I think for our conversation today, I think we're going to talk a bit about, like I said, kind of the IoT space. And again, I think we've been to a couple of trade shows lately, and it seems like IoT has become even a bigger topic, I think, than it was even 6 months ago. I know a lot of carriers are still kind of grappling with it. The industry itself is trying to really get its head around what IoT is going to mean for everybody involved. And so I thought we'd touch a bit on kind of what we've seen, I guess, lately in the space. And so maybe start off with you. I guess any sort of evolution you've seen in the process over the past couple of months. I know you're at the CTIA show recently. You moderated a panel there on the topic. I guess maybe start off with what was kind of the hot topic maybe you've seen in terms of the space over the past couple of months or so.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dan. And IoT is definitely on the forefront of everyone's minds within the wireless ecosystem right now. I think everyone from the infrastructure providers to device providers, application providers, and the carriers themselves, of course, have a huge amount of interest in what the future holds for IoT. The panel that I was involved with at CTIA was part of a really interesting track that was focused on smart cities and IoT and kind of the intersection of the two, and really how you can think about IoT as an enabler of smart cities, which aren't really even just about cities. They're about towns, they're about campuses, they're about all sorts of different clusters of population where we can really take advantage of all the connectivity that we're bringing with IoT. Yeah. I think, the way that we're thinking about it is IoT really is not a one-size-fits-all. I think that too many times you hear a lot of people out there just sort of talking about IoT, let's connect everything. And yeah, that's true. But the reality is that we really have to think about IoT on a case-by-case basis and think about the right solutions. And, despite RCR Wireless being obviously all about all things wireless, wireless isn't even synonymous with IoT, right? Mm-hmm. One point I would really make out there is that IoT is really about connectivity, and that connectivity could come in a lot of forms. And we talked about this on the panel, that you have to think about IoT in some sense as a network of networks. Yeah. It's about not only the cellular networks, be they 3G, 4G, 5G, whatever they may be, but it's also about the wired networks. It's about Wi-Fi and other unlicensed technologies. And quite frankly, it's about good old plain old wired networks as well. Yeah. And I shouldn't leave out, importantly, for a lot of IoT use cases, there's also even the possibility for a satellite component. Yeah. One of the big things we heard about was, how some IoT use cases really require a degree of ubiquitous connectivity that, quite frankly, in the traditional cellular world, we just don't have today. So I think that's going to be one of the really big things that we see coming out there.
Yeah, interesting. That's a good point on the satellite part. I was at the CCA show just after CTIA, and one of the panels there had somebody from Legato Networks on there, and they obviously have got a satellite kind of play as well. And that was talked about from them as well, as the fact that they're looking at IoT as well and what they can bring kind of to the table too with their satellite operations too. But you're right. But it does seem kind of interesting though, because IoT is on the connectivity point of view, it is about just about everything that you can bring to the table. But also, like you mentioned, it is kind of a case-by-case basis. So it's a big picture thing, but also a little picture thing. I mean, you have to really drill down into what makes the most sense. But again, bringing everything to the table in terms of connectivity, because you're right. I mean, wired is going to be probably a bigger part of it than even in wireless is going to be, because there is, at the end of the day, all the wireless networks were all backhauled through wired somewhere anyway. So it is kind of it's an interesting dynamic that we're in, just looking at the big picture, the small picture, kind of how it's all playing out today, it seems.
Yeah. Well, if you think about IoT, right, I mean, if you segment some of the use cases, take, for example, what's going on in the home today.
Yeah.
We already see a lot of smart home type of applications ranging from sort of the, age-old home security to, home control systems, the thermostats and fire sprinklers and alarms and things like that, right? Even down to connected refrigerators and other appliances. A lot of those in-home, examples are going to be satisfied, quite frankly, by good old Wi-Fi, right? They're within a fixed area. Most of the times in your home, you're not dealing with a lot of interference issues, things like that. Mm-hmm. Wi-Fi may be good enough for a lot of those solutions. But when you start to get to some of the smart city applications, the transportation use cases, energy use cases, and, God forbid, things like drones and things like that, you really start to stretch the boundaries of what you can do with some of the traditional connectivity. So, we see things where there are significant gaps today. For example, some of the IoT devices and some of the use cases that are out there are going to be in places where you don't have ready access to power. Yeah. Well, that means you're going to have batteries and power sources that may have to last months or years even for them to really be a viable solution. And that may be okay, but you need then the connectivity that allows you to conserve energy, have very efficient, communications devices to work with those types of solutions, right? If the rail car is out in the middle of nowhere and the battery dies on the monitor, there's not going to be somebody right there to plug it in or swap out the battery. So you need to make sure that those things have really long lives. So low power capabilities, even on LTE networks, are something that we're starting to see carriers talk a lot more about, and starting to see some of the infrastructure manufacturers, work on as well. I'd say another one that we hear as a gap today is also some of the location precision capabilities, right? Some IoT use cases require levels of location precision that we just don't get today with the standard GPS capabilities that we have, and we need additional technologies like RTK that give you augmented location accuracy. Today we don't really do a great job as a wireless industry offering those kind of, integrated capabilities for these types of solutions. So there's a few things that as an industry we probably still have to work on, and we're starting to see, some small startups and some of the infrastructure providers, and then just some systems integrators that are starting to play in this and really bring these capabilities together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I guess that maybe that leads in. I know we have some questions kind of prepared anyway for this. I guess maybe we'll jump into those as well. But that kind of segues nicely into kind of one of the first questions, which was, I guess, the deficiencies in current mobile networks. Again, mobile is going to be a big part of this, maybe not the biggest part, but a significant part of this. And, you kind of mentioned, I guess, a bit maybe on the coverage aspect of it. I mean, is that kind of what we're still looking at in terms of maybe what those big deficiencies are in terms of the current mobile networks? It's just basic coverage still. Is that still kind of what we're looking at as a challenge?
Look, coverage is certainly a challenge, and even within the notion of coverage and ubiquity being a challenge, I would say some of it links into a couple of other areas. Right, one is where the location of that coverage. Right, even in cities, and in fact even in many small towns, we've got reasonably good outdoor wireless coverage. We don't always have really good coverage within buildings. And so I think in-building coverage is certainly one gap. In addition to just flat old wide area coverage, getting out there where we've got utility lines running, or pipelines, or we've got aircraft or whatever it is that are going to be flying or traversing areas that we just don't have great coverage. So that ubiquity of coverage is one. Low power, as I mentioned, is another one. Location is certainly a deficiency, or an area where we could be doing better as an industry. And then I would also say, there's some niche use case examples where we have gaps. So, for example, in traditional cellular with towers and rooftop sites, right, we've done a really nice job of pointing antennas slightly down so that they have great coverage on the ground. Well, that slight down tilt of the typical antenna really doesn't help when you've got a drone that's flying at 500 or 1,000 feet, And, while we heard lots of people at the conferences recently talking about drones as a potentially significant application for IoT and a potentially significant new population of connected devices to be connected to even cellular networks, we may well have just the wrong network model to support drones. And that's where some of these additional capabilities, whether it's satellite or whether it's terrestrial-based networks that point up instead of down, we've seen that. We've all had the benefit of using Wi-Fi on some airplanes, but even those networks really are not set up for drones, as we're starting to see. If I want my pizza coming via drone to my house, I'm going to have some sort of communications network for that drone to drop it off. So got to make sure that we've got good coverage for those drones too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think anybody who's staying in a hotel, maybe above the 30th floor in a hotel, I think we've realized as well too that, once you get up above a certain floor level, you're right, cellular coverage tends to kind of taper off quite a bit. So, but yeah, you're right, the drone situation, that's a great point in that as well. I guess then, are there, and I think we've seen a lot of talk lately, and maybe even some deployments of some of these new, technologies being used, different companies coming out with various new IoT-specific technologies, whether it's LoRa or the Sigfox thing. Various brands have come out on this and kind of really targeting the market. Are these the right steps to tackle this market? Because at the CCA show I was just at, there was a speech or a talk given by John Stanton, longtime cellular industry guy, and he kind of had some questions about the whole model for a lot of these things, because building a wireless network is expensive, and there's already established players in the space already who could probably do it cheaper. And so I'm always kind of a bit, hesitant to kind of get behind some of these newer guys who are trying to deploy networks. Are these legitimate ways to do it, or do you think that eventually the standard legacy cellular guys are going to be the ones maybe who are going to kind of push these new needs that we need, I guess, in terms of IoT coverage?
Yeah, well, Chairman Wheeler from the FCC made a really good point about this in his speech at CTIA, where he talked about the need for continued investment in the wireless industry. And I think that when you look at where we are, a lot of the things that these startups are doing, including the ones that you mentioned, about creating what I would call vertical market specific solutions, is actually a smart way for us as an industry to think about this. Some of them are focused on low power. Some of them are focused on ultra low cost. Arguably, both of those things are needed. Yeah. And so, I think from a business model perspective, these types of innovations, these types of capabilities are really what's needed to make IoT, particularly, what's widely called the industrial Internet of Things, IIoT. It's really what's needed to make IIoT a reality. From our standpoint, we love these types of innovations, and we think that they're actually helping to advance the industry perhaps more rapidly than it could be if it was just the incumbent players. But to your point, in the end, do they really wind up as standalone companies? I would say maybe not, right? Our industry has a great history of, allowing innovations to thrive and to develop, and then gobbling them up and bringing them to scale as part of the industry behemoths. So I think, it's quite likely that, similar to what we've seen in, the traditional telematics world, that we may see the same type of thing happen with IoT, where we may start to see some of these alternative solutions, be acquired or merged with the traditional players, so that they can take advantage of their scale and their sales channels and all of the reach that they have. So, who knows what the future holds, and we're probably a few years off from seeing some of that really play out. Yeah. But if history is any teacher, it'll show us that's probably the path that we'll see in the end.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're right. I guess that startup mentality is pretty important. Again, it's always been a big driver for the wireless industry. And you're right, those guys coming out and announcing things at least seems to have gotten the larger carriers to get maybe more involved. And maybe they might have not have been initially, but yeah, they kind of do need to get a little more aggressive with it. And you're right, maybe those guys, as they kind of build out their models, it makes sense for someone, if they need to at some point have a cash infusion or a network partnership or something like that, for a big guy to come in and kind of take the reins there. But I guess that makes sense. I guess I'll quit being so negative about those things and just realize it's all part of the system. We've seen it before. We'll probably see it again. So
Yeah.
That's a big part there. And again, I know you mentioned Wheeler. Again, he spoke at both CTIA and CCA, and IoT was a topic of both of those conversations there. And it does seem like that at least this administration is being fairly proactive, it seems, in trying to make sure that the regulatory hurdles that could be in the way of some of those advances are kind of at least being addressed, or if not tackled completely. I guess are there still some that we need to worry about, or do you think in general that the government has done a pretty good job at staying up to pace with what's kind of coming out in terms of the market advances out there?
Yeah, I think right now the regulators seem to be, with respect to IoT, letting the market develop. I think you and I spoke a while back about NTIA within the Department of Commerce. They recently had a call for comments, which is somewhat unusual for them, looking at what should the role of the U.S. government be in the development of IoT.
Yeah.
And I think, IoT is somewhat interesting because from a government perspective, it perhaps impacts the government more than just about any other communications technology. Tying it back to where we started with smart cities, right? The government is really all about how do we enable infrastructure, how do we enable good government and smart use of our sort of common infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And so IoT and smart cities are really actually very important to them. And then you layer on to that the federal government's role in a lot of this, not just from transportation standpoint, but from a homeland security, public safety, and a general economic development standpoint, they actually feel like they've got a lot at stake. But for right now, I think that the key for them has been to let the ecosystem, to let the wireless community really develop. We haven't seen a lot of IoT-specific regulation in place. And in fact, if you sort of stretch the definition a little bit, you could argue that some of the things that are going on, some of the things before the FCC right now in terms of business data services and some of the the desire to ensure that there's a competitive marketplace there, those things, whether you agree with them or not, in reality will probably serve to support and foster the development of IoT because they reduce the barriers to entry for it. So that's that's all good in the IoT world.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Well, I guess as mobile operators look at kind of the space, and again, like we've talked a little bit about the fact that some of these new entrants are definitely driving a lot of innovation there, but the big guys are also getting involved in it. And I think we've seen over the past couple of months a lot of new initiatives from whether it's AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile. Always been talking about the IoT space. I guess what should they be looking to do? Maybe their next steps in order to kind of continue that fostering, or at least continue that I guess advances in their own networks towards kind of supporting IoT going forward. I mean, it does seem like a lot of the 5G talk is about densification of networks and things like that, which might be a big part of this as well. But I guess as you look at the operator, the mobile telecom space, what should their next steps be in terms of kind of continued advancements there?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we get asked by the operators all the time. I'll say two things about this. Right. So one is, you mentioned 5G, and I have to say, I asked my panel, which was it included a lot of smart people and leaders from the device side, the infrastructure side, the operator side, and I asked them, I said, do we need 5G to really have IoT flourish? And it was very interesting because there was a unanimous call that we don't have to wait for 5G to make IoT happen. And I'm really glad to hear people say that, because I think that's the right answer. And I think that we're already seeing lots of evidence of advances in IoT, even in advance of 5G being widely deployed. The second thing is, in terms of the operators, there's a real need for a call to action within the operators. Today, most of the operators are simply not set up to serve the needs of IoT, and they're not set up for it in two ways. First of all, they don't really have the deep vertical market application and use case expertise to really drive IoT and to create solutions
Mm-hmm.
for the end users, right? The enterprises, the businesses, the governments that make up the IoT and smart city thing. This is a capability that we really see most operators needing to build or rebuild in some cases, where they really have to get more intimate at the vertical market level.
Mm-hmm.
Most operators have gotten really good and, quite frankly, a little bit lazy when it comes to building out, their knowledge of vertical markets. They're great at taking your order for how many iPhones you want, how many more lines do you need, but they're not really great at creating those tailored solutions.
Yeah.
So that vertical market depth is one big thing. And then right alongside it is a systems integration capability, because IoT is not just about connectivity. It's actually about what you do with the information that comes from these devices, right? Your connected thermostat is only as good as its ability to actually be connected and do things for you that save energy, that save costs, that make your home safer and better to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing for most IoT use cases. So really these systems integration capabilities, again, are something that most operators don't have. And so the question is, do you build them? Do you partner to deliver those capabilities? Do you create a channel through, VARs and VADs, as they've traditionally been known,
Mm-hmm.
who can do these systems integration with your customers? And it really is calling into question what the role of the operator is going to be in the future, right? They may well start to look less and less like just selling widgets,
Mm-hmm.
and more like companies that are very neck deep in your data and helping you to really connect all the pieces of the puzzle together. That is going to be the big opportunity, and I think we're going to see different operators react very differently to this, right? Some may choose to build it, some may choose to buy it, some may choose to partner for it, and it's really going to be a question of how they execute.
Got it. I mean, is that mostly just a business case issue there, where operators are trying to find out, how they can make this work financially? Because it does seem like, the more established incumbent operators, if you look here in the U.S., at least domestically, the two big guys do seem to be kind of dipping their toes deeper into this IoT pool, and perhaps they have the resources, financial, to kind of do that and not be hurt so much initially, where the smaller nationwide guys are, maybe a little more focused on the traditional, how many iPhones can I sell you, postpaid, kind of growth like that. I mean, is it just a matter of having the operator really be able to kind of, I guess, go with the business case that kind of it makes their shareholders happy, I guess, at the end of the day?
Yeah, and it's likely not black or white, right? There's a lot of shades gray in between,
Sure.
But it is about business case, and I would say even more so, it's about what business you really believe you want to be in.
Yeah.
We've seen operators around the world that use their operator platform to be a bank,
Mm-hmm.
to be an advertising agency, to be all sorts of different things to their customers. And I think when it comes to IoT, it's a question of, are you going to continue to be a connectivity provider, or are you going to be something different? Are you going to be a system integrator? Are you going to be a service provider? Are you going to be an interpreter of the data that's actually flowing through these things, right? Today, most operators don't really know or even care what data is flowing over their connections.
Yeah.
With IoT, they have the opportunity to rethink their role in all of that. So that's really the question that's before the operator community.
Do you think the operator community is ready to handle that question? Because they've historically have always kind of been fighting against this dumb pipe model, and that's been their history for the past 10, 15 years, is not being the dumb pipe. And so far they've done a pretty good job of avoiding that to an extent. I mean, it's kind of been chipping away slowly. But as we move into this whole new world where everything literally can be connected, are they able to, you think, I guess, continue to kind of be relevant in this space? Because it does seem like it's becoming more and more of a challenge for those guys, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at what's happening here in the U.S. already, right? We've seen some operators that are sort of pivoting towards more of the content delivery and advertising ecosystem. Yeah. We've seen some of them that are going with a bundled play. We're seeing some that are sticking to their knitting and just becoming, value-oriented consumer plays, just deliver the connection and pretty much not much else on top of it. Yeah. So there are different strategies, different strokes for different folks, I guess. Sure. But this, this is really more of an enterprise play. I would suspect we're going to see some operators that will opt out altogether. Yeah. Some might say, I just don't want to play in the enterprise. It's a new area. It's different. It's not consistent with my brand, whatever the rationale may be. But others will likely embrace it and say, well, look, we know the enterprise is a significant opportunity. We want to be in IoT. And so let's take that opportunity. Yet others may choose to relinquish it to others. I mean, here at PwC, we announced earlier this week a significant partnership with GE, who's really going, betting the company, if you will, on the IoT space. And so together we're looking to really expand that side of things. And I think that in this case, we want to have the operators playing these types of roles in lots of different ways. There's not a single answer for any of them as to what's going to be right for them, but there is a lot of opportunity out there, and it's really a question of who wants to go after it.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, because there has been so much consolidation in terms of the larger operators that it's almost like if we had more of them, we could have more options in terms of going after all these markets. But with having here in the U.S. again, focusing here at least, having 4 big guys and really only 2 of them are kind of on really good, solid financial ground. It does seem to kind of limit their ability to kind of tackle all these markets. And it does seem like it opens up opportunities for yourselves or other integrators out there to really come into play and kind of pull pieces together across vendors, across carriers, and really offer something to the industry that it seems like might be lacking because, again, it's just not enough people out there who can kind of really handle it. So it does seem like the opportunity, at least for new entrants who are not traditional telecom players, but who can partner with everybody, seems like that's kind of a good opportunity going forward in this market.
Yeah, well, there clearly will be. And, we're keeping a close eye also on some of the companies that have really been enablers of the telecom world that have enabled things like, number portability or roaming or interoperability or location services. You look at a lot of those companies who are not the operators themselves, but they're the ones that kind of are in the plumbing of the telecom world. A lot of these companies now are taking a hard look at IoT as the next generation for them. Yeah. Because they understand those companies already have an ability to deal with this network of networks, to deal with the standards and the interoperability that's needed in all of this. And so we see a lot of them now starting to pivot towards IoT as a focus. And they may well be the ones who start to develop some of the really creative solutions for this. But I think when it comes down to it, and you're the enterprise IT manager or the CIO for the local city or the town, you need to have this stuff brought to you and packaged and integrated nicely, right? They don't want to recreate the wheel, have these things happen all over again. So somebody playing the role of systems integrator and even being able to teach them and help them structure how they make the best and highest use of the data that's coming off of all these things is really what's critical to them. And I think for government, back to your earlier point, it's equally as critical, right? We had an unfortunate incident outside of New York City this week with a train out of control, and positive train control, PTC, was one of the immediate things that people responded to. Well, PTC is actually an IoT application. Yeah. Right? It's actually something that relies on the train communicating with the network, understanding position, location accuracy, and using that as a control system for the train. And that train didn't have it, right? That it hasn't been implemented there yet. So we've got, a lot of opportunities, even from a public safety standpoint, to really have IoT make a big impact. But who's going to bring all those things together with the train operator, the network provider, the manufacturer for the train equipment to make those things happen? That's where the rubber is going to hit the road. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, absolutely right. That makes a lot of sense of what's happening out there. But hey, Dan, always appreciate your great insight. Obviously, as this space has been evolving, it's always good to get some insight from you guys on what's happening out there. So definitely appreciate the great insight on that today. And thanks so much for the time. And hopefully we'll talk again soon on either this topic or maybe something else going forward. But always good to talk to you. Thanks again for taking the time today. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check out our next carrier app when we speak with Verizon on its latest IoT moves.